Hi, folks. Sorry, struggling to switch off the music and find my mute button. Welcome back after a break. I hope that you had some nice times during that time. Right. So this session is about we're kind of starting from the back end, the outputs, like what we would like to see coming out of our assemblies. Because very often, if we're clear about what we want at the end of the assembly, it helps us to refine what we need to put in at the beginning of the assembly. So we'll be digging into that a bit more. But first, as always, a little bit of a grounding moment or a relaxing moment or whatever you like to call it. And then we'll go into breakout groups to check in, and then we'll get started. So haven't done this for a while. So the purpose of this is to allow us a little moment to arrive in this space as opposed to whatever space you were in before, whether that was busily doing something, focusing on something else, being annoyed by something, being stressed by something, or having a pleasant daydream. But it's to give us a space to just come here. And also recognizing that for many of us, we may have already spent some time in front of our screens. So just trying to be a little bit conscious about that. So moving back, moving our attention away from the screen into our own space. Using our breath, maybe closing your eyes or just looking at something that looks nice to you in your room that gives you pleasure to look at. Whatever you do to move into like, oh my right now. What is it that I might want to put to one side so that I can really be here in this meeting, and that I can pick up again at the end. I've been thinking about the idea of feeling welcome. And it might be interesting to just think about, do I feel welcome in this space? Do I welcome myself into this space, and am I welcoming other people? And just feeling that energy of what it feels like to feel welcome and to welcome others. And knowing that as we come back into the shared space, that we've all been dwelling on that, we're all feeling that for ourselves and for one another. Welcome to this space and to this process. So coming back into the level of connection with the screen that feels comfortable to you just now. Having we look at all these people who've been thinking welcoming thoughts about you. And yeah, so we're going to split into groups of 4. for a quick check-in, you might want to quickly decide who's going to be timekeeper and split the available time between you. You should have just under 15 minutes. So I think that's 3 or 4 minutes each. You can choose to time that or have it as a kind of random chat or whatever you like in your group. So yeah, if we can open the breakout rooms, Johanna, meeting with a possible assembly that they'd like to run or an actual assembly that they'd like to run. Or a fantasy assembly they would like to run. No? Oh yes, JC has one. Okay. Everyone else. All right. So we have an exercise later on with that needs you to be thinking, at least in theory, about an assembly. And I think what we'll do is create 3 breakouts for that. And whoever goes in the one with JC can help him with his ideas for his assembly, and the other ones will need to come up with a scenario for a possible assembly in a real or imagined community. And I think that the process will work fine like that. But let me start with just some thoughts on this idea of starting with your outputs. Whenever I'm designing a process, I often think, so, how do I want people to feel when they leave this? What am I wanting them to be thinking? What am I wanting them to be feeling? And that sense that you know where you're going can really help you to focus on what it is you want to create for people, what process you want to create for people that will hopefully get them to that place that you're imagining for them. So this kind of turning it inside out or turning it back to front is, I think, really helpful. And there are other ways in which that can be helpful. One of the things we wanted to show you in terms of outputs is this. We've got ideas for assemblies dribbling in the chat, so that's great. And Johanna, if you could, I think there's now 3 people saying that they have ideas for assemblies. If you could create the breakout groups so that JC's in one, Brian's in one, Barbara's in one, and Philip is in one, and then the other people are scattered between those. That would be fantastic, and that's going to be a fiddle for you, but I've got some stuff to say, so you'll hopefully have time. A quick update on Justin. The whole of that part of Nairobi has got its power out. He's trying to join on his phone, but I don't think this is going to happen. So you just got me tonight. Would you be able to share screen, Johanna, with the slides? So I think we've mentioned before this idea of the 4 pathways out of an assembly, and that's what I wanted to show you on the slides, to take you through those. And we start with, there we go, pathway 1 is this kind of personal empowerment. And in fact, Justin and I have got an ongoing disagreement about whether this is a pathway or whether it's something else, because it affects all the other pathways. Basically, it's a pre-requirement for any of the other pathways out of the assembly to work. Because if you don't have people who are empowered and feel like, oh, I could do this, and not only that, but I want to do this, then none of those other things are going to get off the ground in the community. I'm just wondering if anyone else is seeing the slide, or is everyone else seeing loading? Yeah, everyone else seeing loading too. Let me try.
I'll try
Hang on a
again.
sec. This is Justin calling. I probably should take it. I just. Right, Johanna, Justin is in the waiting room. If you could let me in. Okay, so yeah, that is working now. Thank you. So 4 pathways out of community. Someone gets this. So pathway 1 or possibly pathway 0. I'm not sure. Well, I can have a conversation about it later on. But this first underlying absolute pre-requirement for anything really effective to come out of an assembly is that people kind of get that this isn't just anyone who is going to do this stuff. It's me. It's me. I have to do something if I want this to go. The second pathway is that it goes in kind of levels of ambition, I guess. So the second pathway is slightly more ambitious than that. It's saying these are initiatives by local people to meet community needs, but they don't need much money to happen. They don't need to go through great big permission processes. They're like, there's this, derelict bit of land that nobody seems to own. We could create a community garden on it. Or we've identified as part of this assembly that nobody's got any childcare. Maybe we want to set up some kind of childcare circle. So these are things that we can just do. We don't need that. They're low hassle for people, and they might well come up be identified through us kind of identifying needs in the assembly process, and then people can just go ahead and do them. So if we go to the next slide and go to pathway 3, which is up a notch again. These are bigger infrastructural projects that are likely to need the input of people who have power, whether that's political or financial power. So we need permission from the local authority to do this, or we need a law change in order for this to be possible, or we need really significant funding in order to be able to do this kind of thing. So this might be a kind of like a community retrofit project, or it may be stopping an initiative that the community's not happy with. So that might come into a kind of protest or even civil disobedience. But these are pathways out where you're having to negotiate with power, or you're having to deal with power in one way or another. The fourth pathway is one which there isn't a lot happening yet. And this is the one, I guess, in a way that we're, by trying to seed assemblies, by trying to create and feed a groundswell of interest in bottom-up kind of citizen-led democracy, is that we could actually start to make bigger changes, because there's enough of us that we could get together and create, potentially we could create citizen-led networks, or we could decide that we want to run for local council. We want to actually kind of create a bunch of local people who are going to run for the council and try and take over the council, or potentially even run for as a community-led ticket on a national election, though that's not something that we're ready for. But ideally, what we're looking at is we want to change the way that politics happens. And so ultimately, the 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 reason that we're nurturing and working on exactly this sort of thing is that we're hoping that at some point there will be enough people with enough experience of doing these kind of local processes that we could start getting together and making our own decisions rather than having to just take the decisions that are made and come down the chain. We can start making decisions that go up the way, and potentially change that whole structure of power over politics into a power with politics, which is what we need to do if we're going to change the trajectory of the way that things are happening. So I think that's all. We'll just check what the next slide is. Okay, yeah, if you just stop the share. I'm really sorry. I was a little bit distracted while I was doing that because I was getting hundreds of WhatsApp messages, I'm assuming from Justin.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm back.
That's okay. Hello. Great. Did you hear any of that?
No, nothing. I've just got on my phone to join you. The Wi-Fi's gone. The electricity all went out in this part of Nairobi, and then the Wi-Fi's off still, but I'm on the mobile data, so I may run out of data. I don't know where have you got to?
I've just gone through the 4 pathways.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's more to say.
Maybe I could say something. Could I just add something to that? Then you've gone through all 4, have you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just thinking about speaking from what I'm doing here in Kenya, which is working with communities around assemblies, and that first pathway, and I think Eva may have mentioned to you, I don't know, that we have a little interesting discussion as to whether it's useful to call them 4 pathways or to distinguish the first pathway as being what you need for all 3 of the others, the ability to walk the pathways. And certainly working with communities here in Kenya, it's very much about encouraging people to be trustworthy and allowing for good relationships to develop between people within the community. And from that, then everything else flows. But unless there's that kind of people trusting themselves that they can act and that it's worthwhile taking action themselves, and then developing relationships of trust with others, then nothing can really work. But if that's there, then you've got the magic that can really enable things to transform. So that's really all I wanted to throw in there, was just that ability to trust ourselves, to recover our trust in ourselves that is bashed out of us at an early age, where we think that somebody else has to tell us what to do, or we're not good enough, or whatever else. When we recover that trust in ourselves, we also then find that other people recover their trust in us. And you have this incredible kind of magic that can happen. And in terms of what we're calling the second pathway in this presentation, that allows people in communities here to be able to get on with organizing themselves, creating bylaws that they abide by to take care of their forests, finding ways of developing the infrastructure they need within their communities, which may not be the people I work with, it's not generally provided for by government. So that's what we're calling the second pathway here. And in terms of the third, they're then engaging with power. And the forest communities I work with here are often having their homes burnt and being forced off their land. And just yesterday evening, and at the moment we're dealing with a situation where the same way indigenous people of Emberwood Forest have been told they have a week to get out. So they've lived in this forest forever. The military came, the Kenya Forest Service came, the county government came. Yesterday had a huge meeting in one of the big glades in the forest, and they were told they had to get out. So in that case, they're engaging with existing power structures in the sense of trying to stop that process happening. And they do that by both trying to resist, but also by proactively engaging, by trying to explain to the government that they are the best people to conserve their lands, and they're very willing to work with the government. And this third pathway here about engaging with power structures is very much more complex than we generally think. We often think we have to make requests of those in power, and then they might do something, or we think we have to protest against those in power, and we might be able to stop them doing something. But generally, it's a real complex mixture of the two. And as my best friend in Kenya says, you have to look for the people who aren't the zombies in power structures. Lots of people have been zombified, all of us to some extent, by systems of power. And you have to both look for who hasn't been and also help those who have been to recover. And then the last of these 4 pathways, the systems-led processes. So we're engaged in that here in East Africa. We've been holding these supporting these women-led assemblies to happen right across Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and hopefully at some point in Congo. And they've been incredibly empowering. They've been really a process of enabling that first stage of just like really recovering trust in oneself and each other. And in that way, we're also trying to link with urban social movements and others to see if the imagination can build that people can reclaim that power to make decisions and to recognize that in the current political system, those in power are the most powerless people there are. They're the most powerless people to be able to actually make the changes. All they can do is kind of run and look as if they're doing something and maintain the status quo, when what we need is something utterly different. So that fourth pathway, the notion that we can come together and really change the whole thing, is absolutely fundamental. But it can only really happen as you build the other three pathways, as you recover your trust in yourself, and as you are creative in your community, and as you try and engage with power. You then can realize how powerless that power system is, and how much and how capable we are of replacing it with something that's utterly humane, if we're willing to take the risk and dare to try. So I just wanted to show that perspective in, and I may vanish. My mobile data may vanish suddenly. Actually, I don't know how much I've got on the phone in terms of credit, but I just wanted to throw that in. Eva, can I pass back to you?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the only other thing that I wanted to touch on was a much more prosaic set of outcomes or outputs that are to do with recording and sharing outcomes and reporting. And if your assembly is funded, your funders may well have requirements of you around that, but you may also have them yourself. And I think that it's also really helpful to think about the kind of monitoring and evaluation that is often imposed by funders. But really try and take ownership of it for yourself. So what am I wanting to make sure? Why am I doing this? Why do I care? What am I going to feel really happy if it comes out of this process? And what would I feel disappointed around? And how can I measure that? There's things like, funders often want to know about diversity. So if you have to report on diversity, how are you going to collect that evidence? Are you going to have a survey of people as they come in, or are you just going to eyeball it and go, yeah, there was some brown people in the assembly, or there's some people who looked a bit working class, or what? So how do we do this, and how do we not be typecasting one another in trying to sort of really genuinely assess, have I been able to get out of my bubble? So these are important and sensitive assessments that need to be made, and they need to not be tick box. So again, this is another sort of part of what is an output or an outcome of the assembly. And then there's also just like really basic, straightforward things like making sure you take good notes and you're taking a good record. So having somebody who's somehow documenting what goes on, and having enough and the right kind of note takers. If you take massive amounts of verbatim notes of everything that everyone was saying, you may end up with so much at the end of your assembly that you actually can't process it. But if you forget to take notes at all, then you may end up, or if you forget to note the really, really crucial bits, you may have made decisions or identified things that this community really, really wants to do, and then you kind of forget what they were. Particularly if you're feeling responsible for the assembly, and probably in kind of quite stressed performance, I need to hold this all together mode. It's like it's so easy to forget things that happened afterwards. So making sure that there are people in the assembly who are dedicated to and have thought through, how are we going to make really sort of meaningfully capture the process and the decisions or identification of next steps that come out of this. So that's a bit on the different kinds of outputs that come from assemblies. And what we wanted to do was put you into breakouts for about 20 minutes. I think it's mostly going to be groups of about 3 of you around the people who identified that they had an idea about an assembly. And, obviously the people in these breakout rooms are in no position to make any decisions about these assemblies. So all you're doing is resourcing the person who's holding the idea with thinking and ideas and considerations or bits of inspiration around what kind of outputs or outcomes this assembly might be looking for. So you want to start with the person who's holding the assembly idea, telling you a bit, filling you in a bit about what the situation is and what they're hoping for. And I'm going to do a quick screen share in just a tick. We're also going to give you a Jamboard. So I don't know how many people have seen Jamboards before. I find them super useful. So up at the top here, you can navigate, and there's 4 different Jamboards. So they just use this as your breakout room number. So when you get offered to go in a breakout room, take a note of what number it is, and that you either will go into group 1, group 2, group 3, or group 4. At the side here, you can make a sticky note. I don't know if you can see that. It's popping up on my screen. And I can't see your faces, so I have no idea if you're getting that. But along the side at the left, there are some different functions, and this one here is the sticky note one. So you can write on that, and then you can move it around just by clicking on it with your mouse. And you can also make it bigger if you've written a lot on it and you want it to be visible. But please try not to write too much on your sticky notes. How do I think you just go delete. You just select and delete if you don't want a sticky note. Try not to write more than 8 words if you possibly can. And it can be hard to confine your thoughts to that, but maybe you use 2 different sticky notes. Just get the essence of an idea over, or else again they become difficult to navigate. So let me just share the link for that.
Just popped it in.
Oh, great, thank you.
You
So yeah,
wow.
Sorry?
Do you want the prompts in as well?
I think so. Wait a second. Yeah, I was just going to see whether anybody had any questions, and Chelsea does.
Thank you.
Chelsea.
Yes. So could you explain really quickly that process again? So who holds the groups and
So
we're moving around groups, or
yeah,
just
no, you're not moving around. Don't worry. You've been Johanna has organized breakouts around the people who said that they had an assembly. So they will, once you get, and you've already been put into, you've already been selected for a particular breakout. So there's no choice involved. You've just been put in. When you get the invitation, make sure you note the number of your room and go to that sheet of the Jamboard. And from there, the idea is that the note taking is collaborative. So everybody's taking notes.
everybody takes. Okay.
Yeah. If you make a point, you can either make your own note or ask someone else to make it for you. But
why are we remembering which group we go into?
Because that will then you can all end up on the same page of the Jamboard. So if you're in breakout group 1, you'll go to the first page of the Jamboard. If you're in breakout group 4, you'll go to the last one.
All the Jamboards are the same. It's just that we have to choose which one to go into.
Exactly. So that you're all, so that the notes that you're making are the notes that are happening in your room.
Okay.
In your conversation.
Okay.
And so yeah, so person, whoever you are, who said that you had an assembly, to think about, you start off by framing the situation for people. And then we do have a few prompts. Yeah, it's really just the first one, Johanna, that what are the likely outputs from your assembly across the pathways? And come up with three to five things that you'd love to see coming out of the assembly. So we're going to do that for about 20 minutes. Then we'll come back and go straight into a quick break. And then we'll talk about it. And you can tell me what a bloody confusing exercise it was. I have no idea what's come out of it, but hopefully it'll be useful, and give you this sense of the kind of scope, the imagination that you can use. And then we'll either move into the next step after this is what inputs can help to generate those outputs without being manipulative, but by trying to resource the particular assembly that you're trying to do. We may end up speaking a little bit about this week, or we may leave it till next week. Right, I think that's everything. So yeah, hop into these groups, and I'll see you in 20 minutes. Hey, I really hope that was fun and interesting, and we are just going to have a quick break before we continue and get some feedback on that from the different rooms, and just talk generally about outputs.
We weren't
so
watching
should we?
time, so we got kicked off. So I just want to say thank you so much to Pam and Jane.
Great.
Yes, the guys that I was with. Thank you very much.
Any more? You're welcome to stick around, but I was thinking a 5-minute break for a cup of tea or a pee or whatever else would be good. So come back at 51. Would that be right? Yeah, 51. Thanks, Johanna. And welcome back, people. And hopefully sound of my voice will bring some more people back. Okay, I was you will have come back to requests to become co-hosts, hopefully, which you can accept. So we're all co-hosts, which means that anybody is able to use the share screen function. Because I thought that maybe what would be a good way to start would be that somebody from each group could share screen and just take us through briefly what the conversation that you had, and maybe talk a little bit from your point of view about what was easy and what was difficult, or what was interesting to you. So could we have somebody from group 1 who's willing to do that?
It was my idea, but so I would be really grateful if Pam or Jane wanted to talk about it. I think it would let me hear it back.
Great.
Jane, do you want to? You want me to?
No, you carry on. I think that you would, because you were taking a lot of notes.
Okay. So, the idea was that the community would work together to ensure food security across the region. And that was the idea. People would come together to discuss. And out of the hoped for and likely outputs for pathway 2 would be that more people would use the existing community fridges. more people would grow their own food. People would share gluts of food and use the local seed bank. And so, yeah, those are almost more awareness raising things, but coming together to make an agreement about these things. And then pathway 3, we decided that local grocery stores were part of the power structure and that they would become more involved with community fridges. Use local authority land for food growing for people who don't have their own space. And once that public space was taken over, keep control of it, keep it away from the council. A way of taking over things and kind of ruining them. Funding from the local authority for beds, for soil, for seeds. Schools could produce meals from local food, maybe grown on the premises. Community cafes. There is already a community pub in the area, a community restaurant.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, it's very exciting. Pathway 4, autonomous citizen-led processes. Just plant and grow anywhere. And then there were some things that, I don't know, kind of seemed to be part pathway 3 and part pathway 4. And that's organizing surpluses and asking people also to plan for growing surplus.
Oh.
And that the community then organizes itself to work out who grows what, so you don't end up with all, I don't know, runner beans or something. So that's where we got to.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you.
I want to move there now.
Where is this happening? Or maybe
Well,
happening?
not too
Very
far
close to
from here.
Pam, actually. She
Yeah.
could if she would. Just
Outside of Sterling.
Stirlingshire.
In Stirlingshire. Yeah, everywhere, says Anna Maria. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and also that whole kind of the organization needed for like that planning for surplus, which I thought was a great idea. But the fact that there needs to be some way of people communicating around that and planning in advance for that is like another, I guess, it would be something that could come out of the assembly that could be discussed during the assemblies. Like, okay, so maybe this is something that we want to do, but how would it actually work? So it's that kind of it's that kind of thing where you can see, oh right, so that's an output, that's a possible output. What processes within the assembly could happen that could help that, give that the best chance of being a meaningful outcome that would actually work.
And we didn't discuss the producers that we already have, like local dairies, for instance.
Right.
And how to like ask them to operate as co-ops if that's possible, or those kinds of those big structural differences that might need to happen in order to, if you're creating a different system, if you're removing the food system from the capitalist structure we're already in, then those food producers are going to have to operate differently as well.
Yeah. And that's where, yeah, thanks Pam and thanks Justin. Oh, he's gone. That's also where that kind of feature of the fourth pathway, where collaborating with other communities could become quite important. If we're talking about existing producers who are likely not just, they're quite possibly not putting any of their produce into the local community at this stage, but if they were, then it would not likely be just to one community, it would be over several communities. So how coordinating that might work is an interesting thing to think about. Any questions on this one, or should we move on to room 2? Not just now. Okay, so who is in room 2? Brian. Do you want to?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Nick, Philip, and Francine, I think it was.
Okay, I'll share my screen so you can see. There you go. So what were you talking about?
So I was basically saying, what if I could start something within the street, probably more around finding out what issues they actually have, because at the moment there's not much happening at all. So I'm thinking more of well, it was Nick. No, it was Philip, I think, brought up that it was neighborocracy that tied in with the kind of thoughts that I was having. Because what I'm thinking about in terms of the work I've been doing with yourself at Tory, that how do we get smaller units to feed into that and build up the People's Assembly for an area like a community council size? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. So if I start with my own street and find out, because there's not great big issues in my street, except there is a hole just appeared the other day at the one entrance to the street. So that's going to be an issue, but I'm pretty sure the council's on it. So we don't have a big fight with the council to get it sorted because it's going to be so bad. This happened a few years ago, so it looks like it's needing done again. But anyway, the idea was to gather information and the skills, and I'm just thinking about. I mean, I don't know my neighbours that much. There might be guys there that run businesses in the other part of the city, you know, that could have a good effect on what we're trying to do here. But being the oil capital of Europe, supposedly, many of the guys might be in the oil industry and might not be so keen to hear about climate change and such like. So we'd have to tread a wee bit carefully there and just find out what we've actually got at the moment and then take it from there. So we did think about skills once we found that, also tool sharing within the immediate neighbourhood and trying something very locally. Share recommendations for the workmen that we might have. If we get a good workman or even a bad workman comes in about and scams us, then we can share that information with the neighbours. And possibly use Facebook, or we kind of thought WhatsApp might be appropriate, but personally I like Signal. I can't read that very well. Can you expand that a wee bit?
Sorry, that was too much.
And then go down, that's it. I set up an email, yes. I'll use an email initially, just to, as long as we can get the contact information, that gives us a start to share. And then just find out what the issues are. I mean, some of my neighbours, that might be on the breadline, I don't know. Maybe they put all their money into the house, purchasing the house, or they're renting it at a high rate. No, who knows? They might not be as comfortable with themselves. So if we can find these things out, maybe you have a shared larder in the street somewhere, you know, and where people can just share stuff there, and maybe just, you know, have regular meetings eventually. Because at the moment, very little in the street goes on at all. Although many years ago, we did have a problem with drugs in the area, and we started up a neighbourhood watch. But once the druggies moved on, there was not a problem anymore. Everything died down. Then, of course, there was mention of COVID be having a detrimental effect on some streets, where there was quite a good neighbourhood thing going on. But after COVID, it seems to have died away. And there was a discussion around, like in my street 40 years ago, when I had my bairns out there playing around, other bairns would be there playing around, and that brings you together as well. Having been involved in the schools, but now we're an older generation where it's grandkids now, but the grandkids are now on tablets and phones. They're not doing the same kind of thing that they used to do. So that interaction between households is more difficult. So we have to kind of counteract that somehow. And thank you to whoever put I think it might have been Nick, put in the neighbourhood democracy. Joseph Rathenham and neighbourhood democracy. They put that in the chat for me. So that's great. Thank you. I've got that up. Anyway, that's me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Yeah, and there's lots of things that could come out of that. I was thinking about, you know, if there are slightly more elderly people in the street, there's a really nice scheme that's about people making meals, making extra food for neighbors who find it difficult to cook. So that kind of food sharing idea that you had, and maybe also, you know, you could maybe start off with like a street party. That's also a possible way of bringing people together in the first place. Were my thoughts. Anyone else with thoughts on that, on this one?
Sorry, just before we move on, you maybe caught me smiling there because I also said that I'm not the most sociable person. So I don't know how this is going to go, but give it a try.
Absolutely, JC.
I just want to come back on the concern about people, let's say, working in the oil industry. I was very taken aback in France. A number of us ran an anti-nuclear international meeting, and we were taken aback by how many people who came to the meeting actually worked for the EDF, which is the French electricity company. Many people working in these industries themselves are highly concerned about the state of all the things that we care about. So that's worth taking into account.
Yeah, yes, thank you. It's unlikely or maybe not so unlikely allies, allies from maybe unlikely places. Because yeah, they do understand what the situation is, sometimes better than other people, but are stuck in jobs that they need to be in for whatever reason. Okay, group 3. Who's going to speak up for group 3?
I have no idea which group we were.
I think there may only were there. How many breakout rooms were there? So there's
I was
one
in
that
group 3.
I was in group 3.
We were 4.
But if Chrissy is happy to speak for us, then I'm more than happy for Chrissy to do that.
Okay, I'll have a go.
excellent. Well, I'll share screen for you again so that you can see. Oops. Yeah, make it smaller. Go on to the next one. There we go.
Okay, so it was a slightly different situation in our group. We were Barbara was filling us in on a process in her community in Leith that started in way back in 2015 and got in that was kind of similar to this. It got interrupted by COVID, and a bunch of people that she's only on the kind of circumference of are trying to get it all going again, trying to identify what's needed in the community and stuff. And we decided in the end that it would be that we would try and imagine that Barbara was organizing this upcoming assembly, and ask her what outcomes she was hoping for. So, and these are the ones that we came up with. She was struggling with, she felt that the most important pathway is pathway 2 for the place that they were in currently. So that was where most of the attention was. Although then I've forgotten his name, David. Yes, David pointed out that, you know, as discussions were had about the actions that might take place via pathway 2, the chances are that some of them might expand into needing to move into pathway 3, and in which case, so for example, she mentioned a couple of historic buildings that they might try and get funding for to take into community ownership, which would involve working with the council or the Scottish Land Fund or Historic Scotland or whoever. So that's kind of as far as we got. We didn't kind of get the hang of pathway 4, but yeah. Is that good enough summary? Where's Barbara? I can't see Barbara.
You
I'm
here,
here.
Barbara? Oh, there you are.
There she is.
Yeah.
There she is.
I'm on the mobile, so I'm kind of keeping
Ah.
camera a
Oh,
lot of
was
the
that a
time. But
fair summary, Barbara? Or do you want to
yeah,
add
yeah,
any?
definitely. I think I was struggling with having the pathways in front of me. Because I feel like it would trying to think about the outcomes in terms of the pathways made it more difficult for me to identify the outcomes in a way. So it's almost like if we'd just been asked to identify outcomes and then arrange them into the pathways, I might have found that an easier way to process it. But I think that's just my brain not being cooperative. But it's, yeah,
It
it's
makes
just
sense.
yeah. So yeah, but yes, good summary, Chrissy. Thank you.
Love how you're emerging from the landscape there with your background. So any questions or thoughts from anyone on that one? Francine, you're muted.
Just kind of untangling the question of outcomes a little bit, because way back at a previous session, we were saying that when you had your group of people together, you weren't really supposed to be trying to spearheading them towards the outcomes, towards any outcomes, or it was, because everything was to come from them, not from whoever was facilitating the thing. So by kind of processing everything into different pathways, how does that square?
Yes, I do take your point, and I think there's a tightrope to be walked between having already decided what you want the outcomes to be and sort of shoehorning people into, well, what we really want to happen is this community garden, so you guys better come up with that idea for us. Obviously that's not that's not the intention in assemblies, but at the same time, if you have no sense of what the idea is in the process that we've talked about, is that you will have spent some of your time in the preparation phase of this, speaking to lots of people in the community. So the assembly isn't the first place where everyone's going to be meeting and having a conversation about, what's up in this community, what's wrong, what are the things that we really need to pay attention to. That process will have informed you so that you have at least the beginnings of an idea of what people are likely to be thinking is important in the assembly. And if you don't have that, it becomes very difficult to plan for the input that you might have. Like, if you know that everybody is really, really exercised about a proposed infrastructural development, and lots of people in the community are upset about it, or it's a big bone of contention and some people are for and some people are against, that's going to give you a steer as to who you could ask to come and speak. If you don't know that, if you're just kind of showing up and going, okay, what do you want, guys, then you won't have been able to get those things lined up. So there's this sense of like having a kind of having made some intelligent guesses based on the information that you're getting from people about what's likely to be needed and what's likely to be able to come out of it, without shoehorning people into your preset idea. And as we go on and kind of look at the sort of tools that we might use within the assembly to help people think creatively, hopefully you will agree that there is a happy balance to be found in there.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Mhm.
Great. Chelsea.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eva. We had kind of similar questions along those lines. So that's what I suspected. I also thought like doing that process allowed me to think of who I would engage with. So in that scenario of that assembly, it's not necessarily clear because it's across a lot of villages, and maybe it's just engaging mostly growers and producers. So, you know, there's in the customer, like it kind of allowed me to think about who to engage a little more fully. However, I have a flip of that is that I'd like to try to figure out how to use this process to help my village with the place plan. And when I think about that, it just seems so huge, but I'm sure somebody's done it. And so I was wondering if you have any experience with that, like the community-led assemblies developing the place plan, because in that case, the audience is captured. We can go knocking on doors and invite them along and get their opinions, but it's just so massive. There's just so many different elements to it.
To a place plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I do know of somebody who is starting to do exactly that in Bankery, and could probably put you in touch if that would be useful for a chat with people who are involved in that. I mean, my sense is I haven't done it myself with a place plan, and I think the idea with these, you know, the good idea behind any of these schemes is that it's trying to create a structure for people to work within. And there's no way that somebody sat down and said, okay, let's make these place plans too complicated for anybody to do, and completely overwhelming to think about. They may have ended up with that, but I'm sure that that wasn't the intention in the first place. So you know, in your place, I guess I would just like take the initiative and go, okay, we can't do this whole place plan in Awana. It just boggles everyone's brain too much. Why don't we take one part of it?
I was thinking that, like, does it break down? Like, would you have like an assembly on transportation, and then another assembly on healthcare? You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, personally, I really love themed assemblies. I think they're exciting and interesting, and they give a sense of like we've got somewhere to go with this, and also that it kind of different assemblies will cater to different people's interests,
okay,
so that that could be a really nice way to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and Barbara's put a resource in the chat there. Thank you. Anna Maria. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, just a comment. I have been part of organizing different like sessions on citizen assemblies, just like sessions to explain what they are, and through Extinction Rebellion. So that's been like the effort this year. And so far we've organized 4 in the 2 biggest cities, Porto and Lisbon. And the main concern that people bring, one of the main concerns is about really how vinculative they can be. And
how what?
Sorry, I'm translating from how binding, I think is the word.
Yeah.
And so like, this is like by far one of the main, and I know we may have already touched this aspect of it, or maybe we will touch it even further. But at least here so far, most people, and it's usually the same ones who join the fight, there seems to be this concern about, okay, like that sounds great, but if the government's not going to follow, we're just not interested, whatever. And I know this may be quite different in the UK. Well, I know it is. I lived in the UK for 5 years. I know in many ways there are differences. In a place where the dictatorship finished 50 years ago, but progress hasn't been done extensively ever since. Yeah, it's quite a different story. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we focused on people's assemblies as opposed to citizens' assemblies. Because we had a citizens' assembly on climate change here, and but basically it was broadly a bit of a waste of money, and of people's time, and quite a lot of the people who went through it eventually, once they'd heard back the kind of government response, that were quite angry about the fact that they had been kind of taken through a process that didn't really make sense. So if, with these citizens' assemblies that are completely government focused, it doesn't give you anywhere else to go. Whereas if you're doing a people's assembly where, you're focused on a local area and people can turn up, you may have demands for your local authority, and you may have demands for the national government, but you've also got these other pathways, which are, and these are the things we're going to do, whether you like it or not. These are the things that we just want to happen in our community. And I think that can build a kind of sense of agency, a sense of momentum within a community. And it may be, from my kind of like very idealistic sort of point of view, it's that feeling that we can actually do things together that change our world, that is a step towards people believing that they can change the political system. That you can't just jump to that, and that these assemblies are partly to do with just practicing using that muscle just a little bit, just to pick up a community garden before we pick up the whole national agriculture policy. And we're going to work our way up to that, but we'll start on the community garden. So yeah, I think that for me, these feel like kind of, it gives them more chance to have actual real life outcomes and outputs, because we are not going to force our neoliberal governments to make good decisions. They just are less and less and less likely to do that, it seems to me. Which doesn't mean that I don't think people should be working on that, because I think it's great, and of course we should be holding power holders to account and trying to force them to do good things. But this area that we're working in is not so much about that. It's more about how do we step into the responsibility, the sense of our own authority and our collective ability to listen to one another and tackle difficult issues together that could actually end up with us changing our political system. So we're in funny territory. It requires some suspension of disbelief to just have a go. So I'll go to Philip. Thank you for waiting patiently there.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Francine's point, I suppose, about having pre-decided the output sort of to great an extent. I mean, in the assembly that I have in mind in our local community, the group that I'm part of is very much an interested party, and there's lots of other stakeholders with different sort of points of view who would want to involve. So the question really is, to what extent could we, and the group I'm part of, organise and facilitate an assembly when can't really be neutral facilitators? I mean, it seems to me we'd need to bring in outside parties to actually facilitate the assembly. I just wonder if you've got any thoughts about that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the idea that facilitators are neutral is somewhat illusory. Even if somebody doesn't belong to the community, once they turn up and they hear people speaking, they're likely to end up with their own point of view about who's talking sense and who isn't. My way of trying to understand the role of the facilitator is that they're putting good process ahead of their own opinion. Or they're allowed to have an opinion. They might even want to share what their opinion is, particularly if there's a situation where there's some tension. But their real dedication is to good process, which means everyone gets to speak, everyone gets listened to, everybody is respected as a human being, even if people are disagreeing over points of view. I didn't catch the first thing that you were saying, Philip. You were talking about lots of different stakeholders, but is there a sort of disagreement in the community?
Well, we don't know yet, but that there are some. It's a very emotive local issue, I suppose, and there are stakeholders who have very strong opinions and very forceful sort of ways of implementing their ideas locally. But yeah, I think you've answered the question really. I mean, it's to what extent can an interested party also organise and facilitate an assembly?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I mean, if it is more likely to make people trust the process or even engage with the process, then bringing people in from the outside, I mean, it's not an awful thing to do. It's perfectly reasonable thing to do. And it might mean that people would come and engage with the assembly who otherwise would just say, oh, well, if it's run by them, it's going to be like this. I wonder whether there are power disparities between the different parties who have these different attitudes. Are there some people who are in more positions of more structural power, and people who are in positions of less power?
Potentially, yes. I mean, I don't know how powerful you think a community council is, but I mean, the chair of the community council is a very assertive, forceful person, for example, and then there's people involved with the local health and social care partnership and so on. So there's lots of local politics, basically.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've tried to assert as a kind of ground rule of assemblies is that people come to assemblies as themselves. They don't come as their roles, which doesn't mean that they have to pretend they don't know stuff that they know because of their roles, but that they don't get that because you're chair of the local authority, the community council or anything else means you don't, or because you're a local councillor wouldn't mean that you get your voice heard any more than anybody else who's in the room. So I think a lot of what would make an assembly in a context like that work or not would be quite a lot of careful thinking about how to design a situation where people get to feel that their voices are heard, but also where you maybe try and the group values and agreements, but where you also try to come at things in a way that doesn't exacerbate the polarization, where you're attempting to get people to listen sort of underneath the presenting issue to what are the kind of core things that feel really important to us in our community. And then you can maybe build back up to those in a way that you could see that, okay, these are different answers to those fundamental things which we can agree on about how we want our community to be. So pitching your question or your call at a kind of more fundamental level might help people be able to start from a place where they agree more and then the differences between us become less less polarizing, because we know we're all trying to get to the same place. We just disagree on what's the best way to do it, is what occurs to me. Anyone else got thoughts on that?
So what you're saying is you identify what that place is. Like, didn't you say that before? You dream of what that beautiful place looks like, what you want your village to look like, or
yeah. That would be one way to do it. You know, what kind of community do we want to live in? What are the values that we would like to be kind of embodying through our in our community? I don't know if that's helpful. JC, I'll give you the last point because we're nearly at time. I just noticed.
I think we're group 4, so I'll just say that one thing that I got usefully.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks to Tim and Scott for thinking about my situation. One thing that came out for me was, I thought interesting that I think I've had the assumption that the forming of a community to form an assembly is like taking a bunch of atoms and creating something out of atoms. Whereas I think in the situation I find myself in, it's more like there's a bunch of molecules who already have a whole range of strange, weird and wonderful relationships over a long period of time. And those molecules need to be reconfigured to not create atoms, but to create a new entity which can get away from all the old zombie-esque ways of interaction with each other to gain a sense of solidarity and agency, not from atoms, but by reconfiguring a bunch of molecules, let's say.
It's a really interesting and slightly mind-boggling analogy. I'm so sorry that I missed you out. There weren't any post-its on the board, so I had just
we never got
thought to myself that there were only 3 groups. Yeah, I'll share a link to a process that Mickey Kashdan talks about, which I think we've mentioned before. This kind of non-controversial essence that is often underneath what might look like a very polarized debate, but it's really, really interesting work, and I think I think it comes into something a little bit further down the line that we're looking at, but it's worth having a look. I think particularly in these contexts where there's already a disagreement in the community, and you know it's going to come out in the assembly. It can be a way to think through how you might treat that sort of positively. Right. Well, we ramped through that. We didn't really touch on inputs, so we'll start there next week. It might just be me again because Justin is still in Kenya, and the experiment of having him participate from there seems to have failed rather abysmally. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you all next week, and have good weeks until then. Bye bye.